Let's travel back to 1904. The United States is desperate to prove to Europe that they're not just a bunch of cowboys arguing over cattle. So, they host the World's Fair in St. Louis, a massive exhibition of everything modern. Along the way, they basically hijacked the Olympic Games from Chicago, just because they could.
Smart enough to be dumb, dumb enough to be smart.
Enter the main antagonist of our story, James Sullivan. James was the director of physical culture, and he had an ego the size of Texas and the medical knowledge of a medieval alchemist. Sullivan had a theory called purposeful dehydration. He believed that drinking water while exercising was for cowards and that it actually made you weaker. So, he decided the Olympic marathon would be his personal laboratory. The course? A 24.8-mile nightmare through dirt roads that were basically wagon ruts. It featured 7 hills, with inclines so steep you'd need a Jeep Wrangler to climb them today. And remember that no water theory? He provided exactly 1 water well for the entire race. In the middle of a 90-degree Missouri August, that's like trying to cross Death Valley with nothing but a stick of gum and a dream. 32 brave souls lined up at the start. Most of them had never run a marathon. Some were pros, others were just guys who happened to be walking by and figured a free meal after the race was worth the risk of literal death. Meet the runners, the Avengers, if they were all chaotic neutrals. Athlete 1, Andarín Carvajal, a Cuban mailman. This guy literally ran across the entire island of Cuba to raise money to get to the US. Once he landed in New Orleans, he immediately lost all his money in a craps game. He hitchhiked to St. Louis and showed up at the starting line wearing dress pants, a long-sleeve shirt, and a beret. He looked like he was going to grab a latte, not run a 25-mile death march. Athletes 2 and 3, Len Tao and Jan Mashiani. 2 runners from South Africa who were in St. Louis for a completely different event, but someone asked, "Hey, want to run 25 miles for free?" They said sure. They ran barefoot, on gravel, in 90-degree heat. That is a level of toughness that makes me feel guilty for using a remote to change the TV channel. Athlete 4, Fred Lorz, an American bricklayer who trained at night because he spent his days, well, laying bricks. Fred had the spirit, but his legs had other plans. And finally, our hero, Thomas Hicks, a professional who took this race so seriously, it almost became his final achievement on Earth. The starter pistol goes off, and the madness begins. The first problem wasn't the lack of water, it was the dust. In 1904, roads weren't paved, they were dirt, and driving right in front of the runners were the cars of the judges and the press. Back then, cars were new and spit out more smoke and dust than a coal mine. William Garcia, one of the favorites, suddenly collapsed. When they found him, he was coughing up blood. The road dust had literally coated his lungs in a layer of mud and torn the tissue. If they'd found him an hour later, he would have been the first Olympic casualty of death by dust. Meanwhile, Len Tao was doing great until he encountered a variable not in the official handbook: wild dogs. A pack of stray hounds decided Len looked like a snack and chased him a 1.5 miles off course into a literal cornfield. He had to sprint for his life in the wrong direction, yet he still came back and finished 9th. That's what we call external motivation. Back to our Cuban friend Carvajal. He decided the marathon was a great time for some sightseeing. He stopped to chat with spectators, stole some peaches from a press car, and then spotted an apple orchard. The apples were rotten. Carvajal got such bad stomach cramps that he decided to lie down under a tree and take a nap. I'm not joking. The man took a siesta in the middle of the Olympics, but the star of the show was Fred Lorz. After about 9 miles, Fred said, "Screw this." He hopped into his manager's car and drove 11 miles, waving at the other runners who were busy coughing up their internal organs. The car broke down, so Fred, acting like nothing happened, hopped out and ran the last few miles. He crossed the finish line first. Alice Roosevelt, the president's daughter, was about to put the gold medal around his neck when someone yelled, "Hey, I saw that guy in a Ford." Fred's reaction, "It was just a prank, bro." The judges did not find it funny. This brings us to Thomas Hicks. By mile 20, Hicks was dying. He begged for water, but his coaches, loyal to Sullivan's science, said no. Instead, they gave him something that would get you life in prison today. They gave him a dose of strychnine mixed with egg whites. For those who skipped chemistry, strychnine is rat poison. In tiny doses, it's a stimulant. In large doses, it makes your muscles lock up until you die in agony. Since one dose wasn't working, they gave him a second one and washed it down with a glass of brandy, because nothing helps dehydration in 90-degree heat like hard liquor and rodent killer. Hicks started hallucinating. His skin turned gray. Over the last mile, his coaches literally picked him up and carried him, while his feet just sort of mimicked a running motion in the air. He crossed the finish line. He won gold. And then he was immediately carried off on a stretcher by 4 doctors. If he had taken one more sip of his cocktail, the marathon would have ended with an obituary. Final score? Only 14 out of 32 people finished. The Cuban mailman who took a nap in the dirt finished 4th. If he hadn't eaten those rotten apples, he probably would have won the Olympics in a beret. James Sullivan was thrilled. He claimed his dehydration experiment was a success, despite nearly killing half the field. The moral of the story? Modern Olympics are boring. They're professional, sterile, and full of drug tests. In 1904, all you needed was a beret, a taste for rotten apples, and an immunity to rat poison to become a legend. So the next time you're complaining that your gym's AC is broken or your bottled water isn't cold enough, think of Andarín Carvajal. He slept in the grass, ate trash, and almost stood on the podium. And you? What would you do if you saw an apple orchard mid-race? Nap or medal? Let me know in the comments. And remember, don't try the Hicks diet at home.
Smart enough to
Peace!
be dumb, dumb enough to be smart.